The Iliad, Book 6. This is Daniel Lucas Murphy's Your Mythology Book Club.
Welcome to Your Mythology Book Club. I'm your host, Daniel. In this series, we're doing a very close reading of the Iliad, one book at a time. This is episode 6, and so we'll cover book 6. By listening to this entire podcast series, you will gain a thorough understanding and appreciation of the Iliad and many of its finer nuances. As always, I'll be reading the most critical parts of the Iliad, including all the dialogue, to you from the translation by Lang, Leaf, and Myers. The Iliad comes to us from the depths of time. It was ancient to the ancients who collected it from among even older stories and compiled it into the version we have. This means that it's an artifact of literary culture that has been filtered through the minds of people from multiple time periods, each of which represent cultures far different from our own. Therefore, I'll go on tangents to explore some of the more confusing or intriguing historical, religious, and cultural points we'll come across. I'm not a professional scholar, but I am a very well-read amateur who has read various translations of the Iliad many, many times over the years. How I present the Iliad to you in this series is exactly how I read it each time, appreciating the language, enjoying the story, but also frequently pausing to ask, why? Why are the characters doing these strange things? What about their time in history, their culture, or religion would make them want to have done what they just did? Getting a handle on why the characters in the Iliad are doing some of the things that they're doing will help us understand their motivations. Seeing their motivations in the light of their own time period, culture, and religion will allow us to discover the very human story that forms the heart of the Iliad. Book 6 is a gorgeous book of the Iliad, with not only some of the richest sources of cultural and religious concepts and very powerful poetry, but also the most moving family scene when we witness the reunion of Hector, his wife, and their son. By the end of Book 6, you will love Hector as much as the Trojans do, and the complexity of a human war, a real war in which good people must die, will fully set in. The gods take a back seat here. No superpowers, no magically getting lifted out of the path of inevitable death, no comic relief of Hephaestus bumbling around, or Ares getting scolded by Daddy Zeus. Book 6 reminds us that these are real human characters who face the real dangers of war and loss of loved ones. I absolutely love this book. A quick recap of Book 5 before we move on to Book 6. Book 5 was all about the Aristeia of Diomedes, and we followed that hero for most of the book as he, with the help of Athene, went on a rampage against the Trojans. They tried to stop him. Pandaros shot him with an arrow, but Diomedes just had his buddy pull the arrow out, and he kept on going. Then Aeneas teamed up with Pandaros, but that just got Pandaros killed, and Aeneas knocked out. Aeneas' goddess mother Aphrodite tried to save her son from Diomedes, but Diomedes attacked Aphrodite, and she dropped Aeneas and fled off to Olympus. Apollo then stepped in to defend Aeneas, magically having him transported away and getting him healed, while he left a fake, passed-out version of Aeneas on the field for the two armies to fight over. Ares then showed up and began pushing the Greeks back toward their ships. But when Athene returned from making fun of Aphrodite's boo-boo, she assisted Aeneas in attacking Ares, causing him to flee to Olympus as well. So it was complete domination for Diomedes, with Athene's help, of course, throughout Book 5. Book 6 opens with a battle still raging, but now there are no gods on the battlefield to cause one side or the other to have an advantage. Because of this, the lines push back and forth across the plain. It's not really explained why the gods are suddenly not as directly involved as they were throughout Book 5. It may simply be a narrative perspective shift to obscure the role of the gods in affecting the temperament of the warriors. Or it may be that the gods are a little wary of getting so directly involved for a bit after the embarrassments suffered by both Aphrodite and Ares in Book 5. Zeus has not actually forbidden the gods from being so directly involved. That's something he'll do later on in Book 7. Not that this order is obeyed indefinitely. Regardless of why the gods aren't seen much in Book 6, what we will see in Book 6 is that the battle continues. It's still this incredibly long first day of battle that began way back in Book 2 and won't end until Book 7. but that here in Book 6, the focus will be much more on the human level of the conflict, with a couple of scenes in the first half of the book focusing on various Greek heroes, including one long interaction between Diomedes and a Trojan whom he recognizes. And the other big change is that, after our opening scene, we'll pull back from our focus on the Greeks and shift sides, following Hector for the second half of this book. Before we follow Hector, however, we will take an in-depth biographical look at him, this most important of the Trojan heroes. So was the dread fray of Trojans and Achaeans left to itself, and the battle swayed oft this way and that across the plain, as they aimed against each other their bronze-shod javelins between Simois and the streams of Xanthos. First Aias, son of Telamon, bulwark of the Achaeans, brake a battalion of the Trojans and brought his comrades salvation, smiting a warrior that was chiefest among the Thracians. Eusoros' son Acamas, the goodly and great. Him first he smote upon his thick-crested helmet ridge and drave into his forehead, so that the point of bronze pierced into the bone, and darkness shrouded his eyes. Aias the Greater kills a Thracian named Acamas by driving a spear or sword, probably a spear, right into his head. There are at least 3 separate men named Acamas in the Iliad. This is likely the one mentioned in the catalog of ships as being the co-leaders of the Thracians along with Pyros. Then Diomedes of the loud war cry slew Axelos, Teuthranos' son, that dwelt in stablished Arisbe, a man of substance, dear to his fellows, for his dwelling was by the roadside, and he entertained all men. Howbeit, of all these, there then was not one to meet the foe before his face, and save him from fell destruction. But Diomedes took the life of both of them, even of him and Calesios his squire, that now was the driver of his chariot. So passed both below the earth. Diomedes kills a guy named Axelos and his chariot driver Calesios. There's not a lot out there on Axelos, but we can pull out a few things. He's from the town of Arisbe, which was a village not far from Troy. His name means something like without wood, and was used to refer to areas that have little or no forest cover. And all this description about Axelos' home having been a gathering place means that his name has been used now and then by subsequent writers as a way to refer to anyone who provides welcome to others. And Euryalus slew Dressos and Opheltios, and followed after Aesepos and Pedasos, whom erst the fountain nymph Albarbaria bare to noble Bucolion. Now Bucolion was son of proud Laomedon, his eldest born, begotten of a mother unwedded. And as he tended his flocks, he had converse with the nymph in love, and she conceived and bare twin sons. And lo, the strength of these and their glorious limbs Mecestius' son unstrung, and stripped the armor from their shoulders. This Euryalus is a Greek from Argos, the city of which Diomedes is the king, and I honestly don't know why we get so little of him in the Iliad. First off, he was one of the Argonauts, those heroes of an earlier generation who were among the first mariners, and led by Jason, sailed to the distant shores of the Black Sea to recover the Golden Fleece, and had innumerable wild adventures along the way. But Euryalus is also, somehow and sometimes, counted among the Epigoni, the sons of the 7 against Thebes, of which Diomedes was a member, the heroes who actually defeated Thebes shortly prior to the Trojan War. Now, the timelines in Greek mythology are not always super clear and consistent, so I have absolutely no explanation for how he could be both of that earlier Argonauts generation with guys like Jason and Heracles, and also be among the young Epigoni like Diomedes. Not only do I think an explanation of Euryalus' timeline is impossible, I also don't feel it's necessary or even a worthwhile endeavor for our time. We just have to accept that the body of works we collectively refer to as Greek mythology were really many works created by many different people for different purposes across many centuries. But Euryalus, with his important pedigree and close connection to Diomedes, one of our primary heroes, for him to only show up 3 times in the whole Iliad, and one of them just being a reference in the catalog of ships, I don't really understand that. Here, Euryalus has just killed in rapid succession 4 Trojans. These first 2, Dressos and Opheltios, I'm not finding anything interesting on. But for these next 2, Aesepos and Pedasos, the narrator provides us with some good stuff. They're brothers. Again, the trope of the brothers dying together in battle has reappeared. But the twist here is that their mother was a naiad, a female water spirit who was associated with the river Aesepus, for whom one of these sons has been named. The fact that their mother was more than human increases the glory to the Greek Euryalus for having killed them, further making his infrequent appearances in the Iliad just that much more a mystery to me. And stubborn Polypoetes slew Astyalos, and Odysseus with spear of bronze laid low Pidietes of Percote, and so did Teucros to goodly Aretion. Then was noble Ableros killed by the glistening spear of Antilochus, Nestor's son, and Elatos by Agamemnon, king of men. Beside the banks of fair-flowing Satnioeus dwelt he in steep Pedasos. And Lytos the warrior caught Phylacos as he fled, and Eurypylos slew Melanthios. Another hardly ever mentioned Greek, Polypoetes, manages a single kill before shambling off into obscurity again. We'll get one more brief interaction with him, but not until book 23. Odysseus and Teucros each get a single kill as well, followed by Antilochus and Agamemnon. Another seemingly no-name Greek, Lytos, gets a single kill. This Lytos only gets a handful of mentions in the Iliad. Lytos is another guy who probably should have made more of a showing. He led 12 ships full of men here from Boeotia, and he'd been another of the Argonauts. Eurypylos comes up now and then. He's the king of Thessaly and had been a suitor of Helen, so he's oath-bound to participate in this war. The overall effect of seeing all these vignettes of all these various Greek warriors fighting, ones we know well and ones we don't, is to give a picture of the scale of battle, especially after Book 5 having been so dominated by Diomedes. Hey, remember all these other guys? The narrator is saying. They're all still fighting too. It's a whole big war going on, and this right now is the camera panning across the huge expanse of the battlefield, showing all that's happening. Now did Menelaus of the loud war cry take Adrestos alive, for his horses took flight across the plain, and stumbling in a tamarisk bough, brake the curved car at the pole's foot. So they themselves fared toward the city, where the rest were fleeing in rout, and their lord rolled from out the car beside the wheel, prone in the dust upon his face. Then came Atreus' son Menelaus to his side, bearing his far-shadowing spear. Thereat Adrestos caught him by his knees and besought him, "Take me captive, thou son of Atreus, and accept a worthy ransom. Many a treasure is stored up in my father's rich palace, bronze and gold and smithied iron. Thereof would my father yield thee ransom beyond the telling, if he but heard that I am alive at the ships of the Achaeans." So spake he, and moved the spirit in his breast. And now had he forthwith given him to his squire to lead him to the Achaeans' fleet ships, but that Agamemnon came running to meet him, and spake a word of chiding to him. "Good Menelaus, why art thou so careful of the foemen? Have then such good deeds been wrought thee in thy house by the Trojans? Of them not let one escape sheer destruction at our hands, not even the child that mother beareth in her womb. Let not even him escape, but perish together out of Ilios, uncared for and unknown." So spake the hero, and turned his brother's mind with righteous persuasion. So with his hand he thrust the hero Adrestos from him, and Lord Agamemnon smote him in the flank, and he was overthrown. And Atreus' son set his heel upon his chest, and plucked forth his ashen spear. Menelaus here has captured a Trojan named Adrestos alive, being moved to pity or greed by Adrestos' promise his family would pay a ransom for his release. Taking your own prisoners during war and collecting money for their release was quite common at the time. You'd nab an opponent, send a message to his family and friends saying that you've got him, and wait for the ransom offers to start pouring in. War for fun and profit. But Agamemnon comes up, rebukes him, and reminds Menelaus of the treatment he received from his Trojan guest Paris. This also serves to remind us that the war has taken a turn, and is no longer just a traditional war. Ever since the violation of the truce by the Trojan Pandaros, there is no longer the usual honor and battlefield traditional rules at play anymore. It's a more ruthless style of war now. So Menelaus shoves Adrestos away, while Agamemnon kills him. Ironically, Adrestos' name is likely related to the name of the goddess Adresteia, which means something like the inescapability of destiny. This death may also be setting up an instance of a Homeric nod, one of those little narrative snafus where Homer will end up forgetting he's killed someone off. There's another Adrastos who will be killed by Diomedes in Book 11. That Adrastos' father is named as Merops. Our Adrastos here doesn't have his father's name given. Hence, we're not certain if this is a nod or just a repeat of a particularly interesting name for a character whose purpose in the story is to die, despite attempts to wiggle out of fate. Then Nestor called to the Argives with far-reaching shout, "My friends, Danaan warriors, men of Ares' company, let no man now take thought of spoils to tarry behind, that he may bring the greatest burden to the ships, but let us slay the foemen. Thereafter shall ye at your ease also strip of their spoil the dead corpses about the plain." Nestor advises the Greeks to forego looting corpses as the Greeks begin to advance their lines toward the city itself. But not to worry, Nestor is saying. If we all agree to just move forward with fighting together and not loot, then later on we can loot these corpses at our ease, all leisurely. It would be a nice change of pace to get to take your time while looting a corpse, for once. Do a really thorough job of it, you know? So spake he, and stirred the spirit and soul of every man. Now had the Trojans been chased again by the Argives, dear to Ares, up into Ilios, and their weakness overcome. But that Priam's son Helenos, far best of augurs, stood by Aeneas' side and Hector's, and spake to them, "Aeneas and Hector, seeing that on you lieth the task of war in chief of the Trojans and Lycians, because for every issue ye are foremost both for fight and counsel, stand ye your ground, and range the host every whither to rally them before the gates, ere yet they fall fleeing in their women's arms, and be made a rejoicing to the foe. Then when ye have aroused all our battalions, we will abide here and fight the Danaans, though in sore weariness, for necessity presseth us hard. But thou, Hector, go into the city, and speak there to thy mother and mine. Let her gather the aged wives to bright-eyed Athene's temple in the upper city, and with her key open the doors of the holy house, and let her lay the robe that seemeth to her the most gracious and greatest in her hall, and far dearest unto herself, upon the knees of beauteous-haired Athene, and vow to her to sacrifice in her temple 12 sleek kine that have not felt the goad, if she will have mercy upon the city and the Trojans' wives and little children. So may she perchance hold back Tydeus' son from holy Ilios, the furious spearman, the mighty deviser of rout, whom in good sooth I deem to have proved himself mightiest of the Achaeans. Never in this wise feared we Achilles, prince of men, who they say is born of a goddess. Nay, but he that we see is beyond measure furious. None can match him for might. Things are looking good right now for the Greeks, and desperate for the Trojans. On the Trojan side, the seer Helenos, brother of Hector, suggests that they make their stand in front of the gate while the captains Hector and Aeneas rally the troops. And the narrator heavily implies that it's this plan of Helenos's, to make a controlled stand, which ends up preventing the Trojans from being chased all the way back into the city. But Helenos has a second part to his plan, which involves Hector going into the city to direct the citizens there in worshipping and placating Athene. Once he's helped Aeneas rally the troops, Hector is to go quickly into the city and have his mother Hecabe gather all the old women of the city to make an offering of a new garment, the best they have, to the statue of Athene in her temple, and to promise later an even greater offering of 12 cows, if Athene now will have mercy and spare the women and children of Troy. Helenos notes that they have never had as much fear of Achilles back when he was fighting as they now have of Diomedes. So spake he, and Hector disregarded not his brother's word, but leapt forthwith from his chariot in his armor to earth, and brandishing 2 sharp spears, passed everywhere through the host, rousing them to battle, and stirred the dread war cry. So they were rallied, and stood to face the Achaeans, and the Argives gave ground, and ceased from slaughter, and deemed that some immortal had descended from starry heaven to bring the Trojans succor. In such wise rallied they. Then Hector called to the Trojans with far-reaching shout, "O high-souled Trojans, and ye far-famed allies, Quit you like men, my friends, and take thought of impetuous courage, while I depart to Ilios and bid the elders of the council and our wives pray to the gods and vow them hecatombs." So saying, Hector of the glancing helm departed, and the black hide beat on either side against his ankles and his neck, even the rim that ran uttermost around his bossed shield. Hector must have agreed with his brother Helenos' plan, because he immediately jumps down from his chariot and goes throughout the Trojan army, rallying the troops, spreading the word that they're to make their stand against the Greeks there at the Scaean gate. And Hector is successful in preventing the Trojans from being routed. They do make a stand now, which gives him some breathing room to enact the second part of Helenos' plan, which is for him, Hector, to go into the city and get his mother to lead the Trojan women in making this offering to Athene of a new garment and a promise of 12 cows to be sacrificed later. But why are the Trojans trying to placate Athene? Isn't she a pro-Greek god? Athene wasn't only worshipped by the Greeks. At least in the world of the Iliad, all the gods are recognized and worshipped by everyone. But these gods can play favorites, and right now, Athene's favorites are all on the Greek side. This doesn't change the fact that Athene Polias is the goddess who protects cities, which of course includes Troy. The Trojans also realize that Athene has been proven across the past couple of books as the god, other than Zeus of course, who has the most impact on the direction battle goes. And while so far she has indeed been very, very pro-Greek, maybe that can change. The Trojans hope, even if they can't swing Athene around to be completely pro-Trojan, they could at least soften her stance towards them with the right offerings, and maybe then she won't keep helping Diomedes wreck their army single-handedly. The Trojans are desperate here. They're getting chased back into their city, and have a real fear that the Greeks, led by Diomedes on his Aristeia, will actually take Troy soon. They need to get Athene on their side, and that's Hector's primary mission now. We will take a closer look at Hector, primary champion of the Trojans, who is facing the Greeks with their mini-champions, once we start following him after the upcoming interlude with Diomedes and his Trojan acquaintance. As Hector runs up into the city to seek out his mother, note the detail about his shield, slung across his back, banging into his neck and ankles. Clearly, what you imagine, he's carrying one of the huge tower-style shields like Telamonian Aias carries. Before we follow Hector into the city, we're going to have an interlude with Diomedes as he runs into a Lycian named Glaukos, whom he knows, or at least knows of. Diomedes and Glaukos kind of just stop fighting, and they're going to have an extended conversation where they'll talk about their family histories, how their families know one another, and then they'll exchange gifts. Within this conversation, Glaukos will casually drop the single most powerful piece of poetry in the entire Iliad, boom, like it's no big deal. All the while, presumably, the battle is raging on around these two. It's a really strange scene to have in the midst of a battle for many reasons, not the least of which is that it's not believable that these two are only now meeting each other after this war has been going on for years. Let's start by just reading this scene, and then we'll talk about why it's here, because it does make sense, narratively if not logically, I promise, but only with some context. Now Glaukos, son of Hippolytos and Tydeus' son, met in the mid-space of the foes, eager to do battle. Then when the twain were come nigh in onset on each other, to him first spake Diomedes of the loud war cry, "Who art thou, noble sir, of mortal men? For never have I beheld thee in glorious battle ere this, yet now hast thou far outstripped all men in thy hardihood, seeing thou abidest my far-shadowing spear. Luckless are the fathers whose children face my might. But if thou art some immortal come down from heaven, then I will not fight with heavenly gods. Nay, moreover, even Dryas' son, mighty Lycurgos, was not for long when he strove with heavenly gods, he that erst chased through the goodly land of Nysa the nursing mothers of frenzied Dionysus, and they all cast their wands upon the ground, smitten with murderous Lycurgos' ox goad. Then Dionysus fled and plunged beneath the salt sea wave, and Thetis took him to her bosom, affrighted, for mighty trembling had seized him at his foe's rebuke. But with Lycurgus, the gods that live at ease were wroth, and Cronos' son made him blind. And he was not for long, because he was hated of all the immortal gods. So would neither I be fain to fight the blessed gods. But if thou art of men that eat the fruit of the field, come nigh, that anon thou mayest enter the toils of destruction. So Diomedes has just stopped mid-battle when he sees Glaucus, a fairly major side character and best friend of Sarpedon, leader of the important Trojan allies from the land of Lycia. So it's not believable that Diomedes hasn't met Glaucus already, but we'll just have to let that slide if we're going to move on. Diomedes says he's not going to fight a god, with the implication that Glaucus is so impressive that he may well be a god. This despite the fact that Diomedes has just fought with two gods successfully in Book 5. All this stuff about Lycurgus is the example from mythology that came to Diomedes' mind about a mortal who had unsuccessfully fought against a god, Dionysus, in one of the several episodes of people rejecting the worship of Dionysus. I've got a lot of thoughts about Dionysus, including the observation that he's the only god anyone ever talks about rejecting, but I'll restrain myself from getting too off track here and just say that Diomedes is inviting Glaucus to say whether he's human or god. This will open the door for Glaucus to next talk about himself. Then Hippolochus' glorious son made answer to him, Great-hearted Tydides, why inquirest thou of my generation? Even as are the generations of leaves, such are those likewise of men. The leaves that be, the wind scattereth on the earth, and the forest buddeth, and putteth forth more again, when the season of spring is at hand. So of the generations of men one springeth, and another passeth away. Yet if thou wilt, have thine answer, that thou mayest well know our lineage, whereof many men have knowledge. There is a city, Ephyre, in the heart of Argos, pasture land of horses, and there dwelt Sisyphos, that was the craftiest of men, Sisyphos, son of Iolaus, and he begat a son, even Glaucus. And Glaucus begat noble Bellerophon. To him the gods granted beauty and lovely manhood. But Proitos in his heart devised ill for him, and being mightier far, drave him from the land of the Argives, whom Zeus had made subject to his scepter. Now Proitos' wife, goodly Antaea, lusted after him, to have converse in secret love, but no whit prevailed she, for the uprightness of his heart, on wise Bellerophon. Then spake she lyingly to King Proitos, Die, Proitos, or else slay Bellerophon, that would have converse in love with me against my will. So spake she, and anger gat hold upon the king at that he heard. To slay him he forbare, for his soul had shame of that. But he sent him to Lycia, and gave him tokens of woe, graving in a folded tablet many deadly things, and bade him show these to Antaea's father, that he might be slain. So fared he to Lycia by the blameless convoy of the gods. Now when he came to Lycia and the streams of Xanthos, then did the king of wide Lycia honor him with all his heart. 9 days he entertained him, and killed 9 oxen. And when on the 10th day rosy-fingered dawn appeared, then he questioned him, and asked to see what token he bare from his son-in-law, even Proitos. Now when he had received of him Proitos' evil token, first he bade him slay Chimera the unconquerable. Of divine birth was she, and not of men, in front a lion, and behind a serpent, and in the midst a goat. And she breathed dread fierceness of blazing fire. And her he slew, obedient to the signs of heaven. Next fought he with the famed Solomai. This, said he, was the mightiest battle of warriors wherein he entered. And thirdly he slew the Amazons, women, peers of men. And as he turned back therefrom, the king devised another cunning wile. He picked from wide Lycia the bravest men, and set an ambush. But these returned no wise home again, for noble Bellerophon slew them all. So when the king now knew that he was the bravest offspring of a god, he kept him there, and plighted him his daughter, and gave him the half of all the honor of his kingdom. Moreover, the Lycians meted him a domain preeminent above all, fair with vineyards and tilth to possess it. And his wife bare wise Bellerophon 3 children, Isandros, and Hippolochus, and Laodamia. With Laodamia lay Zeus, the lord of counsel, and she bare godlike Sarpedon, the warrior with arms of bronze. But when even Bellerophon came to be hated of all the gods, then wandered he alone in the Iliad plain, devouring his own soul, and avoiding the paths of men. Anisandros his son was slain by Ares, insatiate of battle, as he fought against the famed Solomai, and his daughter was slain in wrath of gold-gleaming Artemis. But Hippolocos begat me, and of him do I declare me to be sprung. He sent me to Troy, and bade me very instantly to be ever the best, and to excel all other men, nor put to shame the lineage of my fathers, that were of noblest blood in Ephyre and in wide Lycia. This is the lineage and blood whereof I avow myself to be. And talk about himself, Glaucus certainly did, or rather mostly about his far more interesting grandfather, Bellerophon, the guy who, in most versions of the story, tamed the flying horse Pegasus. But as in many cases, Homer has his own version of mythology, and the Homeric Bellerophon story doesn't seem to include any flying horse, but rather focuses on the challenges, such as fighting the monster Chimera, posed him by King Proitos. But early on in this family history, Glaucus drops this line like it's nothing, which I don't think I'm alone in feeling is the single most powerful bit of poetry in the entire Iliad. Even as are the generations of leaves, such are those likewise of men. The leaves that be, the wind scattereth on the earth, and the forest buddeth, and putteth forth more again, when the season of spring is at hand. So of the generations of men, one springeth, and another passeth away. Peter Green's translation is maybe a little more accessible and makes this very human point more clearly. As the generation of leaves, so is that of mankind. Some leaves the wind scatters earthward, but the fertile woodland grows others as spring returns in season. So with men, one generation grows while another dies. One generation passes, falling away like autumn leaves, and another generation takes his place in the spring, only to one day fall like the previous have all done. This is not only a beautiful summary of the worldview of the ancients, for whom life was a passing fancy, a brief moment to win glory in, before fading away to a gray, meaningless eternity. But it's also the thesis statement of Book 6, as we reconnect with the human characters of the Iliad, and the real fears and threat of loss they face. So said he, and Diomedes of the loud war cry was glad. He planted his spear in the bounteous earth, and with soft words spake to the shepherd of the host. Surely then thou art to me a guest friend of old times through my father, for goodly Oeneus of yore entertained noble Bellerophon in his halls, and kept him 20 days. Moreover, they gave each the other goodly gifts of friendship. Oeneus gave a belt bright with purple, and Bellerophon a golden double cup, the which when I came I left in my palace. But of Tydeus I remember naught, seeing I was yet little when he left me, what time the Achaean host perished at Thebes. Therefore now am I to thee a dear guest friend in midmost Argos, and thou in Lycia, whene'er I fare to your land. So let us shun each other's spears, even amid the throng. Trojans are there in multitudes, and famous allies for me to slay. Whoe'er it be that God vouchsafeth me, and my feet overtake. And for thee are there Achaeans in multitude, to slay whoe'er thou canst. But let us make exchange of arms between us, that these also may know how we avow ourselves to be guest friends by lineage. So spake the twain, and leaping from their cars, clasped each the other by his hand, and pledged their faith. But now Zeus, son of Cronos, took from Glaucus his wits, in that he made exchange with Diomedes Tydeus' son of golden armor for bronze, the price of 50 oxen for the price of 9. Having heard all of Glaucus' family history, Diomedes plants a spear in the ground to show that he's no longer seeking to fight Glaucus, and happily replies that he knows that his grandfather and Glaucus' grandfather had known each other, and more specifically that his grandfather had hosted Glaucus' grandfather, and that they had exchanged gifts, and that therefore Diomedes wants he and Glaucus to not only avoid fighting each other, but he wants them to exchange gifts too. Now, to those of us today, big deal. Our grandfathers knew each other. That wouldn't necessarily impact our relationship now. But this entire conversation and the exchange of gifts that's about to follow is tied up in the guest-host relationship, which was vitally important in ancient times. This was the grease on the wheels of international relations. And what's more, there was a significant religious implication here. One of Zeus's epithets was Zeus Xenios, Zeus of strangers, meaning that Zeus protected those who were foreign travelers and punished those who violated the etiquette surrounding this guest-host relationship. Taking in a foreign traveler meant creating a permanent bond with that person. And from Diomedes' reaction to learning who Glaucus' grandfather was, it's clear to us that this bond persisted across generations, making Diomedes responsible for continuing his grandfather's obligation to Glaucus' family, a nice tie-in after Glaucus' poetic statement about the generations of humankind falling like leaves. I've linked an article in the show notes by Byron Harries called Strange Meeting, Diomedes and Glaucus in Iliad 6, which explains the subtleties of this interaction in great detail and ultimately helps us understand the context of this scene and how it's perfectly in place here on the battlefield. Here's my own synopsis of Harries' arguments. This lengthy meeting that results in an unequal exchange of gifts is usually thought to refer primarily to the guest friendship customs of ancient times. Zeus was the god of strangers, and the customs relating to travelers in strange lands were strictly enforced by Zeus himself. Diomedes and Glaucus discovered that their grandfathers were friends, and so these two, meeting on the battlefield, engage in a lengthy exchange of personal family histories and mythologies, and ultimately in an exchange of gifts, which is notable in that Diomedes walks away with gifts far more valuable than those he gives, because Zeus impacts Glaucus' wits when it comes to choosing what to give. Diomedes gives up his bronze armor that's worth 9 oxen. It was an oxen-based economy then. And Glaucus gives him armor made of gold worth 100 oxen. And this alone would be a perfectly sufficient reading of this scene in itself. But it does leave us feeling that it was a little out of place. Let's step back for a moment. Diomedes has been on a rampage. His Aristeia is ongoing. The Trojans are inside their city right now, figuring out how to plead with Athena to stop her champion, Diomedes. And keep in mind that the Temple of Athena is the major temple of Troy. She'd, previous to this war, been the patron goddess of their city. So why stop the action here for this lengthy and frankly kind of dull scene? Harries gives us a lot more context and understanding for this scene. In his view, the battle does not stop, but rather the weapons become words, and the contest is between their family histories and their understanding of mythology. During this verbal duel, Diomedes must maintain an acute awareness of the limits placed on him by Athene. Remember, he was to attack, alone anyway, no gods other than Aphrodite. So he must know the name of each person he goes up against on this battlefield, where gods so often appear under the guise of various mortals. And read this way, Diomedes is the victor, earning that more valuable armor in the unequal gift exchange. We can see Diomedes thinking about the danger he is in the opening remarks he makes to Glaucus, where he references the myth of Lycurgus. This is an interesting bit of story about another figure in mythology who, like Diomedes, opposed a god, in that case Dionysus. And like Diomedes, Lycurgus at least initially had success in chasing the god off. But things did not end well for Lycurgus. When Dionysus drove him insane and in various accounts, in his insanity, either pruned his own son to death, mistaking him for a grapevine, or cut his own foot off when attempting to trim a grapevine, or attempted to rape his own mother while drunk on wine. In any case, Lycurgus' victory over his divine opponent was brief, his punishments horrible, and of course, wine-themed, as the god he was up against was Dionysus, god of wine. Remembering that he has recently driven no less than Ares himself off the battlefield, Diomedes must be wondering if he's in a similar situation as Lycurgus, that brief moment of illusory victory before the terrible revenge of the god. And so Diomedes demands of Glaucus an account of himself, who he is, so that Diomedes knows that he's not going up against another god. And so Glaucus did answer, first asking why Diomedes is even asking for this information, but then opening his speech with that beautiful piece of poetry, illustrating the mortality and interchangeability of human generations. And so Glaucus tells Diomedes his family history, but he doesn't seem to get it. He's not engaging with mythology to the extent that Diomedes is, and he clearly doesn't realize that he is in a verbal and mythological battle right now. Glaucus just repeats his family history, where Diomedes is exercising caution and fear of the gods, even in the midst of his own Aristeia. This differentiates Diomedes from his own father, whose downfall was an excess of grotesque battle rage, eating the very brain of his own slain victim. That caused his patroness Athene to recoil in horror from him. In reward for his superior understanding and restraint, Diomedes wins this verbal victory over Glaukos, and the two part, seemingly at peace amidst the chaos of battle, but in fact they separate as victor and slain. For the rest of Book 6, we will follow Hector in his efforts to rally divine support for Troy in the face of Diomedes' unstoppable, divinely inspired rampage. Since we'll be spending so much time with Hector for most of the remainder of Book 6, let's take a biographical look at this most important Trojan hero. Hector was the oldest son of King Priam and his primary wife Hecuba, and therefore heir to the throne of Troy. He's married to Andromache, and they have one child together, a young son named Scamandrius, who was more commonly known by his nickname Astyanax, which meant Lord of the City, an affectionate term the people called the king's grandchild and presumed future king himself. The name Hector means something like to hold, and may either be meant to imply that he always has a weapon in his hand, or that he was the one holding on in the fight on behalf of the Trojans. Hector was one of many, many children of Priam. Shortly, we'll see inside the palace there are 50 bedrooms for Priam's 50 sons and their wives, and another 12 bedrooms for his daughters and their husbands. This may not even be exhaustive of all of Priam's progeny, just those who are living in the palace. But Hector is the most responsible of Priam's children, and the only other one of any major story significance is Alexandros, otherwise known as Paris, whose irresponsibility in bringing Helen and this war to Troy has become Hector's job to manage. Now, as I've said many times and will continue to say, Achilles is the main character of the Iliad. He is our protagonist, and it's his story arc that we're following. But it's a strange fact of the Iliad that we have to remind ourselves about Achilles' central role, since he's absent for long stretches of narrative time. Not so for Hector. Hector is at least mentioned in every one of the Iliad's 24 books. And Hector's story is, if not the central one of the Iliad, certainly the most poignant and relatable for us as readers. On the Greek side, there are several major heroes. Achilles, of course, but also Odysseus, Diomedes, Agamemnon, Menelaus, both Ajaxes. Heck, even Teucros gets his own little mini Aristeia. In Troy, it's very different. Hector stands alone as the single major warrior, and the weight of the responsibility he bears is made all the more urgent by the fact that it's his city which is under attack. The Greeks are far from their homelands, their families presumably safe at home. Furthermore, the urgency of Hector's responsibility for the defense of Troy will be made heart-rendingly touching near the end of Book 6, when we will witness a brief and moving scene between Hector and his little family. In addition to being perhaps the only character in the Iliad whose name appears in every single book, no other character in the Iliad is shown with a family, as Hector is. This makes him by far the most relatable character. So why isn't the most relatable character of the Iliad its protagonist? To fully answer that, I would have to spoil the ending, which is a complex emotional puzzle that takes all 24 books for us to work on. So instead, I'll say two things. One, yes, Achilles is the protagonist of the Iliad, and it begins and ends with Zeus's response to Achilles' prayer, made in anger, at the insult he suffered from Agamemnon. Hector is the instrument of Zeus's answer to Achilles. And two, a central theme of the Iliad is grief, and this is strongly related to why its protagonist is so often absent, while its most sympathetic and most frequently mentioned character is not its protagonist. But if I were to explain the nature of this relationship, then I'd have to explain the whole rest of the Iliad, and we've got 18 more books before we're ready for that. So look for the foreshadowing, not only here in Book 6, but throughout all of Hector's appearances. He's not perfect, he's a little boastful, and he's not quite the amazing warrior he's trying to project himself to be. Unlike the superhuman heroes of the Greeks, Hector's a regular guy, and he'll eventually make the same kind of mistake that any regular guy would make who's been trying too hard to hold it together for too long. Then, Zeus will pick him up and use him as the instrument of Achilles' fate. and the final pieces of the puzzle will fall into place. Let's follow Hector now as he enacts his brother's plan, the seer Helenos, who has foreseen a way for Hector to turn the Greeks back from the very walls of Troy, not with the sword, but by encouraging the women of Troy to appease Athene through offerings of fine garments and the promise of animal sacrifices later. Now, when Hector came to the Scaean gates and to the old oak tree, there came running round about him the Trojans' wives and daughters, inquiring of sons and brethren and friends and husbands. But he bade them thereat all in turn pray to the gods. But sorrow hung over many. Hector enters Troy through the Scaean gates with the nearby oak tree mentioned. This oak tree is one of a handful of battlefield landmarks, and in later books when it's mentioned alone, the implication is that we're very near the main gate of Troy. Hector is immediately surrounded by women asking for news of their loved ones on the battlefield. He's in a hurry, however, and doesn't stop to answer all their questions, instead advising them all to pray to the gods. He's compassionate. Clearly, they would normally have expected him to spend the time updating them, so his response must have been especially worrisome. But when he came to Priam's beautiful palace, adorned with polished colonnades, and in it were 50 chambers of polished stone, builded hard by one another, wherein Priam's sons slept beside their wedded wives, and for his daughters over against them on the other side within the courtyard were 12 roofed chambers of polished stone, builded hard by one another, wherein slept Priam's sons-in-law beside their chaste wives. Then came there to meet him his bountiful mother, leading with her Laodice, fairest of her daughters to look on, and she clasped her hand in his, and spake, and called upon his name, My son, why hast thou left violent battle to come hither? Surely the sons of the Achaeans, name of evil, press thee hard in fight about thy city, and so thy spirit hath brought thee hither, to come and stretch forth thy hands to Zeus from the citadel. But tarry till I bring thee honey-sweet wine, that thou mayest pour libation to Zeus and all the immortals first, and then shalt thou thyself also be refreshed if thou wilt drink. When a man is awearied, wine greatly maketh his strength to wax, even as thou art awearied in fighting for thy fellows. Then great Hector of the glancing helm answered her, Bring me no honey-hearted wine, my lady mother, lest thou cripple me of my courage, and I be forgetful of my might. Moreover, I have awe to make libation of gleaming wine to Zeus with hands unwashen, nor can it be in any wise that one should pray to the son of Cronos, god of the storm cloud, all defiled with blood and filth. But go thou to the temple of Athene, driver of the spoil, with offerings, and gather the aged wives together, and the robe that seemeth to thee the most gracious and greatest in thy palace, and dearest unto thyself, that thou lay upon the knees of beauteous-haired Athene, and vow to her sacrifice in her temple 12 sleek kine, that have not felt the goad, if she will have mercy on the city and the Trojans' wives and little children. So may she perchance hold back Tydeus' son from holy Ilios, the furious spearman, the mighty deviser of rout. So go thou to the temple of Athene, driver of the spoil, and I will go after Paris to summon him, if perchance he will hearken to my voice. Would that the earth forthwith might swallow him up. The Olympian fostered him to be a sore bane to the Trojans, and to great-hearted Priam, and to Priam's sons. If I but saw him entering the gates of death, then might I deem that my heart had forgotten its sorrows. Hector rushes into the palace of his father, King Priam, where we get a glimpse of the luxury in which the royal family has lived, both in physical terms and in the wealth of family they have been blessed with, as the city which up until now has controlled the valuable shipping at the Straits of the Dardanelles. Hector passes through polished stone colonnades in which are the 50 bedrooms of Priam's 50 sons and their wives, and another 12 rooms for Priam's daughters and their husbands. No, it's not implied that poor Hecabe gave birth to these 62 children. Priam has various wives and women in other relationships with him. This extensive royal family with multiple wives and concubines was perhaps a way of signaling to the Greek audience the vast, ostentatious wealth of Troy, if the king could support so many women and children, and therefore the honor that Greece had accrued by defeating them. Priam's familial excess may have also been a way of defining the Trojans as barbarian others, as Athenians believed their own practice of recognizing only marriages between one man and one woman was instituted by their mythic founder, Cecrops. Hector's mother Hecabe and his sister Laodice come out to meet him, Hecabe offering him wine to refresh him, but Hector declines, not wanting to lose his strength and wits to fight. Instead, he describes what they are to do to placate Athene, to bring to her statue in her temple the finest robe they have. As we discussed in episode 5, offering robes to Athene was a ritual performed in Athens. It was a major part of the annual Plinteria festival held each year during the month Thargelion, which corresponds to our May/June, in traditions which would have been very familiar to the Iliad's original audience. In addition, Hector instructs them to promise to sacrifice to Athene a dozen young cattle. So said he, and she went unto the hall, and called to her handmaidens, and they gathered the aged wives throughout the city. Then she herself went down to her fragrant chamber, where were her embroidered robes, the work of Sidonian women, whom godlike Alexandros himself brought from Sidon, when he sailed over the wide sea, that journey wherein he brought home high-born Helen. Of these Hecabe took one to bear for an offering to Athene, the one that was fairest for adornment and greatest, and shone like a star, and laid nethermost of all. Then went she her way, and the multitude of aged wives hasted after her. Hecabe has sent her handmaidens to gather all the wives of the city. We can imagine these are all the important ladies of Troy, wives of major figures such as Aeneas. Meanwhile, Hecabe herself goes into her own room where she stores her clothing, a fragrant room, in a time when fragrances were all among the most exotic luxuries. And here, Hecabe chooses a particularly expensive garment to offer Athene, a gift from her son Alexandros. This robe would have been purple. How do we know this? The text says that Alexandros brought it from the city of Sidon, which is in what is now Lebanon. Sidon is still there and still called Sidon, but in ancient times it was a Phoenician city known for its expensive purple dye, the royal color which at various times and places was only allowed to be used by the highest ranks of society and which continued to have a ceremonial importance, being used on the emperor's robes right through the fall of the Byzantine Empire in the 1450s. With the required offering in hand, the women of the city follow Hecabe to the temple. Now when they came to the temple of Athene in the citadel, fair-cheeked Theano opened them the doors, even Chryseis' daughter, wife of horse-taming Antenor. For her the Trojans had made priestess of Athene. Then lifted they all their hands to Athene with a lamentation, and fair-cheeked Theano took the robe and laid it on the knees of beauteous-haired Athene, and lifted up her voice and prayed to the daughter of great Zeus, Lady Athene, savior of the city, fair among goddesses, break now Diomedes' spear, and grant moreover that he himself may fall prone before the Scaean gates, that we may sacrifice thee now forthwith in thy temple 12 sleek kine, that have not felt the goad, if thou wilt have mercy on the city, and the Trojans' wives, and little children. So spake she praying, but Pallas Athene denied the prayer. The women of the city, led by Queen Hecabe, marched to the temple of Athene. We can imagine some grand temple behind locked doors, which the priestess Theano opens. Inside is a dark interior space, dominated by an enormous statue of Athene. With song and prayer, the women raise their hands, lamenting, crying. They place this incredibly expensive garment upon the knees of the larger-than-life statue. From this we can imagine a seated Athene, unlike the standing Athene which had been inside the Parthenon of Athens. The priestess Theano implores Athene to break Diomedes' spear, that she cause him to fall before the Scaean gates, and they'll sacrifice a dozen young cattle to her. If only you'll have mercy on us, the wives and children of Troy. Athene hears their prayer, but Athene denies it. They don't know it, but she will not grant their prayer. There are many prayers in the Iliad, but anytime the granting of a prayer would come into conflict with that fateful prayer Achilles was granted by Zeus at the beginning of the Iliad, it is denied. Now that we're here in the temple, let's stay for a moment and talk about this place and a key artifact it contained. In mythology, this Trojan temple to Athene was very important. and this is only one of a number of incidents which will happen here throughout the Trojan War, although the others will occur in other episodes of the epic cycle. Within the world of the epic cycle, of which the Iliad and the Odyssey were only 2 of the 8 total works, this Temple of Athene was home to a very ancient and religiously significant artifact known as the Palladium. The Palladium was likely a zoanon, a wooden cult statue of the goddess. This would have been small, maybe only 1 to 2 feet tall, and not the larger-than-life statue dominating the interior space of the temple, with the Trojans are dressing in a new garment. Although small zoanon statuettes likely had their own ceremonial doll-sized garments as well. In the later episodes of the epic cycle, which will follow the Iliad, it will be revealed to the Greeks that they will need to steal this statue, the zoanon, the Palladium, from the Temple of Athene before the city can fall. And it will be Odysseus and Diomedes, my 2 favorite heroes, who will reunite to make this happen. Now, I'm fascinated by ancient Greek religion, as well as the intersection between mythology and history. So the possibility of there having really been wooden cult statues like the Palladium is something that's right up my alley. But I'd read online that no zoanon, or zoana, I suppose the plural would be, were known to still exist. This wasn't surprising to me. They were wooden. The chances of a wooden artifact surviving from antiquity seemed pretty remote. So you can imagine my absolute surprise and joy when, while touring around the Paolo Orsi Archaeological Museum in Syracuse, Italy last year, I came across a case with not 1, but 3 zoana in it. I actually saw 3 of these. They do still exist. And then when I got home, I, of course, had to figure out what I'd just seen. Were these real? Why had I been led to believe that they didn't still exist? And in the show notes under citations, you'll find the results of my reading, as well as the photos I took of the real zoana. I've linked to articles by Bejor and by Zambito, which date at least one of these zoana to the 7th century BC, and talks about the unique situation which led to these wooden objects lasting so many centuries. Now, of course, these zoana are not imagined to have come from Troy, but they are real, and must have served a similar religious purpose to the Greek settlers of Italy who had made them. It seems that these zoana were preserved by the fortunate presence of a sulfur spring, which must have acted to prevent them from decaying. Now, my linking to Google translated papers is in no way a proper academic way of doing things. Ideally, we'd get Bejor's article properly translated by someone who knows Italian and English and archaeology. But I'm not a scholar, and I don't have the resources of a university at my disposal. So for now, this is what we have. The fact that most of these papers are only in Italian likely explains why those of us in the English-speaking world who look at English Wikipedia get told that these things don't exist. I almost felt like I shouldn't even bring this up because of the tremendous joy I felt at discovering a wonderful thing I had thought impossible. But then I had 2 other thoughts which changed my mind about sharing this discovery here. 1, this podcast is made with a lot of passion, but without any expectation of significant listenership. So am I really going to spoil that many joyful surprises like I had? And 2, if we do get the word out in the English-speaking world about zoana still existing, how much joy would that bring other lovers of ancient Greece who could go to Syracuse and see them, who might not otherwise have gone to that museum? It might bring overall more joy than I'm spoiling by taking away the surprise. So there you have it, the continued existence of real-life zoana, presumably not at all unlike what the author and audience of the Iliad were imagining the Palladium of Troy to look like, the sacred object whose possession controlled the very fate of Troy, and which was believed to have been in the very temple we just visited along with Hecabe and the women of Troy. We'll now leave the women and return to Hector. So were these praying to the daughter of great Zeus, and Hector was come to Alexandros' fair palace, that himself had builded with them, that were most excellent carpenters then in deep-soiled Troy land. These made him his chamber, and hall, and courtyard hard by to Priam and Hector in the upper city. There entered in Hector dear to Zeus, and in his hand bare his spear, 11 cubits long. Before his face glared the bronze spear point, and a ring of gold ran round about it. And he found Paris in his chamber busied with his beauteous arms, his shield and breastplate, and handling his curved bow. And Helen of Argos sate among her serving women, and appointed brave handiwork for her handmaidens. Then when Hector saw him, he rebuked him with scornful words. Good sir, thou dost not well to cherish this rancor in thy heart. The folk are perishing about the city, and high wall in battle. And for thy sake the battle cry is kindled, and war around this city. Yea, thyself wouldst thou fall out with another, didst thou see him shrinking from hateful war. Up then, lest the city soon be scorched with burning fire. Now, meanwhile, Hector has proceeded to the home of his brother Alexandros, near to the homes of Priam and Hector himself in the upper city. Troy was built upon a hill, and in fact the hill had the remains of even more ancient cities below it. Into his brother's home comes Hector, bearing a spear described as being 11 cubits long, which was maybe about 16 feet, I think. He finds there Alexandros and Helen. Alexandros is cleaning his armor, while Helen is directing her maids in various housework. Not exactly what you'd like to see from your brother while the city is under attack. And Hector is understandably frustrated to find Alexandros enjoying his domestic life while the city is under very real threat. This is the relationship they have, and us, as presumed responsible listeners to the Iliad, identify all the more with Hector as he upbraids his younger brother. And godlike Alexandros answered him, Hector, since in measure thou chidest me not, and not beyond measure, therefore will I tell thee, lay thou it to thine heart, and hearken to me, not by reason so much of the Trojans, for wrath and indignation sate I me in my chamber, but fain would I yield me to my sorrow. Even now my wife hath persuaded me with soft words, and urged me into battle, and I moreover, even I, deem that it will be better so, for victory shifteth from man to man. Go to then, tarry a while, let me put on my armor of war, or else fare thou forth, and I will follow, and I think to overtake thee. They have an exchange very similar to one we've seen previously, in which Hector, kind, compassionate, but very irritated Hector, heaps insults on Alexandros, while Alexandros just kind of rolls with it, responding with his usual, you're right, it's fair for you to be upset with me. No, I'm not afraid of fighting, just feeling mopey, you know. But just now Hector was telling me I should go to battle, and I agree, so I'm getting my armor ready and I'll be out soon. Alexandros is saying all the right things, so I guess we kind of have to forgive him. But come on, man, the city is under attack. So said he, but Hector of the glancing helm answered him not a word. But Helen spake to him with gentle words. My brother, even mine that am a dog, mischievous and abominable, would that on the day when my mother bare me at the first, an evil storm wind had caught me away to a mountain, or a billow of the loud-sounding sea, where the billow might have swept me away before all these things came to pass. Howbeit, seeing the gods divides all ills in this wise, would then that I had been mated with a better man, that felt dishonor, and the multitude of men's reproaching. But as for him, neither hath he now sound heart, nor ever will have. Thereof deem I moreover that he will reap the fruit. But now come, enter in, and sit thee here upon this bench, my brother, since thy heart chiefly trouble hath encompassed, for the sake of me, that am a dog, and for Alexandros' sin, on whom Zeus bringeth evil doom, that even in days to come we may be a song in the ears of men that shall be hereafter. Hector is silent, without response to his brother's words, maybe not at all sure whether to be placated or not. Into this awkward silence, Helen interjects, and it's more of the heartbreaking Helen we met back in Book 3. She starts off with a lengthy speech about how she's a dog, mischievous and abominable, and wishes that on the day she was born, a wind had just come up and carried her off to a mountainside or into the sea, or failing that, if she just ended up with a better man, one who could at least feel dishonor when other men condemn him. And then Helen really lays out her opinion of Alexandros, saying that he doesn't have a sound heart, and that he'll end up paying the price for it. Exactly what Helen is saying about Alexandros here is a little unclear. I think we get a better picture from Green, who has Helen saying her husband doesn't have a stable mind, or from Lattimore, who Helen says his heart is not steadfast. The impression I'm getting from all of these translations merged together is a sense that Alexandros can't commit to anything, and that's not what you want to hear your spouse saying. In the context of this particular society, you really can't get any worse than that. As a man, a warrior, and a prince of the realm, for your own wife to say that you don't have it in you to stand up for your city, and to say it to your champion brother right in front of you, as if you're not there. Absolutely no one thinks anything of Alexandros, only Priam, who loves him with the desperate love of an elderly father. And as we saw leading up to the duel with Menelaus, not even Priam is so blind as to think Alexandros a warrior. Then great Hector of the glancing helm answered her, "Bid me not sit, Helen, of thy love. Thou wilt not persuade me. Already my heart is set to succor the men of Troy, that have great desire for me that am not with them. But rouse thou this fellow. Yea, let himself make speed, to overtake me yet within the city. For I shall go into mine house to behold my housefolk, and my dear wife and infant boy. For I know not if I shall return home to them again, or if the gods will now overthrow me at the hands of the Achaeans." Hector politely turns down Helen's offer of refreshment, saying he wants to see his wife and son, because he doesn't know if he'll ever get a chance to see them again. All he wants from Helen is to get her lazy husband up and out the door to help defend the city. We'll see later on whether Alexandros does in fact join the fight. So spake Hector of the glancing helm and departed, and anon he came to his well-established house. But he found not white-armed Andromache in the halls. She with her boy and fair-robed handmaiden had taken her stand upon the tower, weeping and wailing. And when Hector found not his noble wife within, he came and stood upon the threshold, and spake amid the serving women. "Come tell me now true, my serving women, whither went white-armed Andromache forth from the hall? Hath she gone out to my sisters, or unto my brother's fair-robed wives, or to Athene's temple, where all the fair-tressed Trojan women propitiate the awful goddess?" Then a busy house-dame spake and answered him, "Hector, seeing thou straitly chargest us, tell thee true. Neither hath she gone out to any of thy sisters or thy brother's fair-robed wives, neither to Athene's temple, where all the fair-tressed Trojan women are propitiating the awful goddess. But she went to the great tower of Ilios, because she heard the Trojans were hard pressed, and great victory was for the Achaeans. So hath she come in haste to the wall, like unto one frenzied, and the nurse with her beareth the child." Now Hector goes to his home, expecting to find his wife Andromache and his son Scamandrios there. But they're not at home, and according to the female servants he questions, neither are they at the temple of Athene with the other noble women of the city. Instead, they went to the wall, Andromache in a frenzy, because she heard the Achaeans were advancing and coming in victory to take the city. Like Hector, her thoughts were of her beloved at this time of crisis. Is he safe? Will I see Hector again? Their hearts are moving toward one another, driven by the fear that this may be their last meeting. So spake the house-dame, and Hector hastened from his house, back by the same way, down the well-builded streets. When he had passed through the great city and was come to the Scaean gates, whereby he was minded to issue upon the plain, then came his dear one wife, running to meet him, even Andromache, daughter of great-hearted Eetion that dwelt beneath wooded Placos, in Thebe under Placos, and was king of the men of Cilicia, for his daughter was wife to bronze-harnessed Hector. So she met him now, and with her went the handmaid, bearing in her bosom the tender boy, the little child, Hector's loved son, like unto a beautiful star. Him Hector called Scamandrios, but all the folk Astyanax, for only Hector guarded Ilios. So now he smiled and gazed at his boy silently, and Andromache stood by his side weeping, and clasped her hand in his, and spake and called upon his name. "Dear my lord, this thy hardihood will undo thee. Neither hast thou any pity for thine infant boy, nor for hapless me, that soon shall be thy widow. For soon will the Achaeans all set upon thee and slay thee. But it were better for me to go down to the grave if I lose thee. For nevermore will any comfort be mine, when once thou, even thou, hast met thy fate, but only sorrow. Moreover, I have no father, nor lady mother. My father was slain of goodly Achilles, for he wasted the populous city of the Cilicians, even high-gated Thebe, and slew Eetion. Yet he despoiled him not, for his soul had shame of that. But he burnt him in his inlaid armor and raised a barrow over him. And all about were elm trees planted by the mountain nymphs, daughters of aegis-bearing Zeus. And the 7 brothers that were mine within our halls, all these on the selfsame day went within the house of Hades. For fleet-footed, goodly Achilles slew them all amid their kine of trailing gait and white-fleeced sheep. And my mother, that was queen beneath wooded Plachos, her brought he hither with the other spoils, but afterward took a ransom untold to set her free. But in her father's halls was she smitten by the archer Artemis. Nay, Hector, thou art to me father and lady mother, yea, and brother, even as thou art my goodly husband. Come now, have pity, and abide here upon the tower, lest thou make thy child an orphan, and thy wife a widow. And stay thy folk beside the fig tree, where best the city may be scaled, and the wall is assailable. Thrice came thither the most valiant that are the 2 Iontes, and famed Idomeneus, and the sons of Atreus, and Tydeus' valiant son, and essayed to enter, whether one skilled in soothsaying revealed it to them, or whether their own spirit urged and biddeth them on. Hector makes his way to the Scaean gate, and looks around, not finding Andromache and Scamandrios. He knows the battle is still going on, and feels the pressure to go out and defend the city. This is Hector, after all. He bears the weight of Troy's fate. He must face the consequences of his brother's sin and their father's inability to correct Paris himself. It looks like he'll have to rejoin the fight without having seen his family, when from there in the crowd, not up on the relative safety of the wall itself where he looked to find them, but within the press of the crowd, come running Andromache and the nursemaid carrying Scamandrios, the infant and heir to Troy, little lord of the city, Astyanax. Husband and wife embrace. Then Andromache stands by Hector's side, holding his hand and weeping. This is a beautiful and tragic scene, the possibly last time this little family, mother, father, and son, are all together. Andromache fears for their future, telling Hector, your strength, your dedication to the city will be your downfall. Have pity for me and for your infant son. If you're killed by the Achaeans, it would be better if I died too. Without you, there will be no comfort in the world for me. You're everything to me. Please, just stay here. Otherwise, I'll become a widow and your son an orphan. And she's not wrong. The life of women and children captured in battle could be horrible, and to have died cleanly in battle may, in retrospect, have been an easier fate. Then great Hector of the glancing helm answered her, Surely I take thought for all these things, my wife, but I have very sore shame of the Trojans and Trojan dames with trailing robes, if like a coward I shrink away from battle. Moreover, mine own soul forbiddeth me, seeing I have learnt ever to be valiant and fight in the forefront of the Trojans, winning my father's great glory and mine own. Yea, of a surety, I know this in heart and soul. The day shall come for holy Ilios to be laid low, and Priam, and the folk of Priam of the good ashen spear. Yet doth the anguish of the Trojans hereafter not so much trouble me, neither Hecabe's own, neither King Priam's, neither my brethren's, the many and brave that shall fall in the dust before their foemen, as doth thine anguish, in the day when some mail-clad Achaean shall lead thee weeping, and rob thee of the light of freedom. So shalt thou abide in Argos, and ply the loom at another woman's bidding, and bear water from Fount Messias or Hyperia, being grievously entreated, and sore constraint shall be laid upon thee. And then shall one say that beholdeth thee weep, This is the wife of Hector, that was foremost in battle of the horse-taming Trojans, when men fought about Ilios. Thus shall one say hereafter, and fresh grief will be thine for lack of such an husband as thou hadst to ward off the day of thraldom. But in me death may the heaped-up earth be covering, ere I hear thy crying and thy carrying into captivity. Hector responds, saying first that he knows that the day will come when Troy will be destroyed. Let that sink in for a moment. Hector knows Troy will fall, and all of us will be killed. You'd never get that sense from how hard he fights as the lone true champion of Troy. He tells his wife Andromache that, yes, I've thought of these things. All of your fears are my fears too, but I cannot shrink from battle, not only because of the shame I would feel in the eyes of the Trojans, but mine own soul won't let me walk away. Yet I know in my heart that the day is coming when Troy will be destroyed. And I think about the anguish that everyone will face, my father, my mother, all my siblings. But the thought of any of them suffering doesn't trouble me as much as the thought of you suffering, you, Andromache, led away to Greece as a slave, being commanded to work at a loom by some Greek woman, or being commanded to carry water from a well to someone else's home. And people will see you at your menial work, and they'll say behind your back, there goes Andromache. She was the wife of Hector. And even just hearing that will renew your suffering and your tears. And before all that happens, I would rather be dead and the earth heaped up upon me. Hector is marching to his fate no less than any of the other major characters of the Iliad. But unlike Achilles, whose pride set him upon his path, or Agamemnon, for whom grief was his downfall, with Hector it's his sense of duty. Andromache was exactly right when she said, "This thy hardihood will undo thee." It will undo him. There will be one minor sin at the end that will precipitate his fall, but that will only be the final push. It's Hector's sense of duty which leads him to place himself upon the precipice again and again throughout the Iliad. To avoid the fate he fears for his wife and child, he must fight. To avoid the shame of not fighting, he must fight. To be who he is, Hector simply must fight, even though he knows this will all ultimately be futile. Carl Jung, in his work Man and His Symbols, wrote, "Experience shows that the unknown approach of death casts an umbraccio, an anticipatory shadow, over the life and dreams of the victim." Literal foreshadowing can be a real thing, and not just an artistic touch to a story. Hector's future death is stretching backwards in time to darken even this beautiful family moment in the present. Hector wants his story to be that of the hero who saves the city, but deep down, he knows his story will end otherwise. Yet what else can he do? By risking himself and falling in battle, Hector's fears for his wife and son will come true. But by not fighting, his fears will only come true sooner. So spake glorious Hector, and stretched out his arms to his boy. But the child shrunk, crying to the bosom of his fair-girdled nurse, dismayed at his dear father's aspect, and in dread at the bronze and horsehair crest that he beheld nodding fiercely from the helmet's top. Then his dear father laughed aloud, and his lady mother. Forthwith glorious Hector took the helmet from his head, and laid it all gleaming upon the earth. Then kissed he his dear son, and dandled him in his arms, and spake in prayer to Zeus and all the gods. O Zeus and all ye gods, vouchsafe ye that this my son may likewise prove even as I, preeminent amid the Trojans, and as valiant in might, and be a great king of Ilios. Then may men say of him, far greater is he than his father, as he returneth home from battle. And may he bring with him blood-stained spoils from the foemen he hath slain, and may his mother's heart be glad. And now Hector reaches out to his son, the little lord of the city Astyanax, and the child shrinks back into the arms of his nursemaid from the grim figure approaching him, frightened by the terrifying bronze-helmed figure with the crest of horsehair. And Hector takes off his helmet and laughs, and so does Andromache. And Astyanax smiles, and Hector takes up his infant son in his arms in this beautiful family moment. And Hector prays aloud to Zeus that his son may become strong and brave, a king of Troy, and one that people will say is even greater than his father, bringing home glory and treasure, and make his mother happy. Now the audience, the original audience of the Iliad, they knew Astyanax's fate. And we just heard Hector say he knows Troy will lose this war. This prayer is illogical from a narrative standpoint. It's only here to increase the emotional weight of the scene, because Astyanax will not survive to manhood, and we all know it. This is another prayer denied, so that Achilles' selfish prayer can be granted. So spake he, and laid his son in his dear wife's arms, and she took him to her fragrant bosom, smiling tearfully. And her husband had pity to see her, and caressed her with his hand, and spake and called upon her name, dear one. I pray thee, be not of over-sorrowful heart. No man against my fate shall hurl me to Hades. Only destiny, I ween, no man hath escaped, be he coward or be he valiant, when once he hath been born. But go thou to thine house, and see to thine own tasks, the loom and distaff, and bid thine handmaidens ply their work. But for war shall men provide, and I in chief of all men that dwell in Ilios. And Hector gently gives the Styanax to Andromache, who takes him smiling through her tears. Hector caresses Andromache and asks that she not be too sad. It will only be through an act of destiny that someone can defeat me in battle. This is true and may have provided some comfort. Hector is an outstanding warrior, and it will take more than a random stroke in battle to take him out of the action. Let's each of us take up our duties. And this is the most Hector thing he could say, and I'm sure that Andromache understands. To lose oneself in duty. What else can you do in a world where every life is determined by fate? They have found joy in each other, but like everything of life, even this joy is fleeting, and this beautiful moment is over. So spake glorious Hector, and took up his horsehair-crested helmet, and his dear wife departed to her home, oft looking back, and letting fall big tears. Anon she came to the well-established house of man-slaying Hector, and found therein her many handmaidens, and stirred lamentation in them all. So bewailed they Hector, while he yet lived within his house, for they deemed that he would no more come back to them from battle, nor escape the fury of the hands of the Achaeans. So now Andromache, looking back often, walks away alone to their home. And upon reaching home, she stirred lamentation in them all. And the women of his household grieved Hector while he yet lived, for they believed they would never again return home. Does this seem a little strange? We have certainly had some foreshadowing here. Andromache feeling that, in walking back into battle, Hector is walking away from her and to his death. Time may be getting played with here as well, the future bleeding into the present, using the emotional logic of the story. But we see our lives through the stories we tell ourselves. And the story Andromache is telling herself, as much as she wants it to be about the happy family scene we just witnessed, I have a feeling there's an undercurrent of doubt, a sense that doom is inevitable. Andromache's personal history impacting her interpretation of things should also be taken into consideration as well. Achilles has already killed her father and her 7 brothers. Hector is not only her husband, he's all she has left. Thus, the past is coming forward into the present for Andromache as well. Author Franco Maiolari goes as far as to suggest that Andromache is suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, analyzing her actions and behaviors across the handful of times she's depicted in the Iliad. The argument is compelling and certainly not unreasonable given such a tragic history. Neither lingered Paris long in his lofty house, but clothed on him his brave armor, bedight with bronze, and hasted through the city, trusting to his nimble feet, even as when a stalled horse, full fed at the manger, breaketh his tether, and speedeth at the gallop across the plain, being wont to bathe him in the fair flowing stream, exultingly, and holdeth his head on high, and his mane floateth about his shoulders, and he trusteth in his glory, and nimbly his limbs bear him to the haunts and pasturage of mares. Even so Priam's son Paris, glittering in his armor like the shining sun, strode down from high Pergamos laughingly, and his swift feet bare him. Forthwith he overtook his noble brother Hector, even as he was on the point to turn him away from the spot where he had dallied with his wife. To him first spake godlike Alexandros, Sir, in good sooth I have delayed thee in thine haste by my tarrying, and came not rightly as thou badest me. And Hector of the glancing helm answered him and said, Good brother, no man that is right-minded could make light of thy doings in fight, seeing thou art strong. But thou art wilfully remiss, and hast no care, and for this my heart is grieved within me, that I hear shameful words concerning thee in the Trojans' mouths, who for thy sake endureth much toil. But let us be going. All this we will make good hereafter, if Zeus ever vouchsafe us to set before the heavenly gods that are for everlasting the cup of deliverance in our halls, when we have chased out of Troy land the well-grieved Achaeans. Back before the Scaean gate, just inside the city, we now find Alexandros, finally done polishing his armor, joining Hector, glittering in his armor like the shining sun, as Hector was leaving that spot near the gate where he'd had his moment with his wife and son. Hector tells Alexandros, You are strong and no one can question that. but it grieves me to hear Trojans speak shamefully of you. So let us go, and this will all be made well, once with the aid of Zeus we have driven the Achaeans from our lands. The brothers, reunited in this hopeful moment, return together now at the conclusion of Book 6. Wow, Book 6 is always such a moving piece of literature, containing some of the most important, beautiful, and iconic scenes. I'm so grateful I got to share this with you. Next time, we'll examine Book 7, and things will change up again. The gods will be back, as the battle will rage across the plain. True men will participate in single combat, as well as another attempt at peace. And there will be a pause in the action, a reassessment as both sides think about how to proceed, with one side making a decision that will change the course of battle at the expense of angering the gods. Until next time, this has been Daniel with Your Mythology Book Club. Thanks for listening.